This is actually a session that Michelle Maynard and I developed for our Camp Joshua students. We realized at some point during this whole pro-life thing that we do that a lot of people, especially Camp Joshua students, but a lot of folks were very small when Roe v. Wade, the decision came down, and also many of them have been born and lived their entire lives under Roe v. Wade, and it might be a good thing to go back and take a look at how we got to Roe v. Wade and a little bit about what has happened since then that gives us this structure, this legal structure that we're under that allows abortion to be legal for any reason at any time during pregnancy as a matter of federal case law. So this is not a comprehensive seminar that would take many hours, probably more than one day. There have been a lot of cases which have come down both at the circuit court level and the Supreme Court level, which interrelate with Roe. But we tried to narrow it down to what, in our view and in the view of people who are actually lawyers and legal experts, is sort of the straight line. There are a lot of branches off of the straight line. If you're really interested in it, I have some resources for you. I'm going to try to give you an overview, and hopefully this information will be helpful as you are in your communities and your churches and talking with people about mainly why are we involved in politics at all? Do you ever get that question? Well, abortion really isn't. Why is it a political issue? Roe v. Wade is the reason it is a political issue. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit. Well, the whole time, actually, not just a little bit. Let me see if... Okay, so we're going to start at the beginning. Everybody remember their civics class, hopefully. We have to teach our children because I'm not sure they're going to get it in civics, but my oldest is about to go into high school next year, and they already know about the 3 branches of government, even my 6-year-old, so that's because they live in our household. But we do have 3 branches of government at the federal level. Theoretically, the Constitution is what set it all up, the legislative, executive, and judicial. So the judicial branch, their job is interpreting law, and that comes from the legislative branch. Sometimes the executive also does things that get challenged. People aren't sure that they are up to constitutional muster. So how does a law, a case, come before the Supreme Court? There are 3 paths. So one is original jurisdiction, which is very rare. That's not normally how things happen. There are just a few cases where original jurisdiction would be used, and it doesn't apply to Roe. The most common one is an appeal from a circuit court, which, I was looking at this slide the other day, and I think there are 12. Someone wants to correct me because they were doing some reorganization of the circuit courts, but the country is divided basically into circuit court districts. So Oregon is in the 9th Circuit, which is very infamous for its bad decisions, or an appeal from a state's highest court. So most state courts are called the Supreme Court. So that would be a state law would normally go through the state court, but sometimes state laws can be appealed to the circuit court if it has a federal aspect to it. So there's lots of different ways that a piece of legislation can be challenged and get up to the Supreme Court. There are also other kinds of cases that reach the Supreme Court. Sometimes you'll hear of if there's a conviction, a criminal conviction, or there are not just laws that are that make it to the Supreme Court, but we're going to focus on that because that's what happened with Roe v. Wade. So this is probably not new to you, but it is important to remember that when the U.S. Supreme Court issues an opinion, it supersedes what's happening at a federal level or a state level. It becomes essentially the law of the land, even though it wasn't legislated. So let's talk a little bit about how we got to Roe. It started way before 1973. The most direct predecessor to Roe was a case called Griswold versus Connecticut. And it all started with contraceptives. So there was a law in Connecticut that you could not use or distribute contraceptives, basically. Couldn't prevent conception. And so you can see the year, 1965, a lot of turmoil going on in the United States. I wasn't born yet, but I've read about it. So there were activists who wanted to see these laws overturned. And the way that they chose to see them overturned was in the courts. And they had tried to challenge this law in the past. The U.S. court kept dismissing them. They weren't taking the cases. The percentage, I think we took that slide out. It's a very small percentage of cases that are requested to be heard by the Supreme Court actually are heard by the Supreme Court. They only take a very few cases, and they get to decide. It's completely up to them. They're under no obligation to hear a case. So they get together and they meet and they talk about what cases they're going to want to take. So the Supreme Court had not taken any challenges. So this time they decided to open a clinic that was in direct violation of the law to distribute birth control. And sure enough, she was elected. See, I'm still back in my political session. She was arrested and found guilty and fined $100 each. Big whoop, right? But that wasn't the point. The point was to appeal the conviction. So they started that path to the Supreme Court. That was their goal. So the initial conviction was upheld by the appellate court and the Connecticut Supreme Court as this law was perfectly constitutional. And then she appealed her conviction to the Supreme Court, which of course was the point in the beginning. And so the Supreme Court decided to take the case, and they did overturn it. And this is one of the places where you find a reference to the right to privacy. And so this is where this initially started. So it basically, the court said using contraceptives is part of this not enumerated, but we think it's implied right to privacy. So they overturned Connecticut's law. And they see. You notice, what word are we looking for in here? Anybody? What word looks familiar? If you're, we've got privacy in there. Penumbra. So this is one of the things that is also repeated in Roe. So this is a quote from the case, from the opinion, that the right of marital privacy, which is within the penumbra of specific guarantees of the Bill of Rights. There's nothing in the Bill of Rights that says husband and wife can use contraceptives, but what they're saying is that that the penumbra. We'll talk about that. Yeah. So just keep that word in mind. Now, one of the interesting things that the Supreme Court does, which makes it really fascinating, is that, and why Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton are still important to us this long, is that the Supreme Court lives and dies by case law. So in Griswold versus Connecticut, they went back to another case that is completely unrelated to contraceptives or to abortion, but related to the ability to associate. Now, I don't know about you. I think this is a big stretch. So do some legal experts, that you get the right to associate with, because I think that's, this was about disclosure of membership lists, and it had to do with some other issues. I think that this is a lot closer to our Bill of Rights that are actually enumerated, but this case did talk specifically about the First Amendment and privacy, and again, this word penumbra. So what does it mean? It means an area in which something exists to a lesser or uncertain degree. Now, I really have no idea what that means either. But what they're saying, and what they have continued to say, what the court has continued to say, is that we can kind of see in between the lines in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, that they really meant we were supposed to have this shield of privacy. And they have used that to keep extending the so-called rights of people to the point where they extended the right of a mother to kill her own child. The next case we're going to look at is Eisenhower v. Baird, which is similar. Massachusetts had a law, isn't it? I find sometimes it's hard to get my head around the fact that the northeastern part of the country, which now, of course, is known as being a very hardcore liberal place, had all these laws about contraceptives. But anyway, their history it makes sense. But so they had a law about contraceptives as well, and activists came and they set up a shop so that they would violate the law. They would distribute contraceptives to unmarried people. This particular guy had a unique thing. He went to universities and lectured about it and then passed out condoms. So, of course, now they do that, and it's not against the law, but then it was against the law, and so they challenged that. He was convicted, and he was challenged, and it went before the Supreme Court. And again, now they had Griswold v. Connecticut, so now they're continuing to build this case law. So the unmarried people now have the same right to privacy. So this is just a little bit of a timeline. I'm going to click through so that you can see that it was the people that wanted to get to the point where abortion was legal. This was the path that they were taking, and it was a very clear strategy that they were using. So then they found Norma McCorvey and Texas, and Jane Roe arrives, and she claims that her pregnancy was a result of a rape. She wanted an abortion, and Texas had a law that prohibited abortions except to save a woman's life. So she was not allowed to have an abortion in Texas. And so they took that case, and the picture back there, Linda Coffey and Sarah Wennington were the attorneys who brought this suit on Norma McCorvey's behalf. How many of you have read her book, McCorvey's book? Yeah. You should, if you haven't had an opportunity to read it, you should read it. This whole situation it's actually very tragic, and I'm very thankful that Norma has had, the conversion experience and the life that she has now, but she still suffers from this. It was a very dark time in her life, and they didn't help any. So Roe v. Wade eventually reached the Supreme Court on appeal, and the court ruled 7-2. The majority opinion was written by Harry Blackmun to strike down the Texas abortion law. And this, of course, was a major rift in the United States. I mean, I think if you read Harry Blackmun's papers, they've been made public now. It's absolutely fascinating read. And Harry Blackmun, his papers have been made public. So there's the opinion, but then there's letters and other things that he wrote. They really thought they were solving this problem. They looked at, there was so much turmoil going on, and they looked at this as we're going to make this ruling, and then we're going to be done with this issue. And looking back on that and reading that, it just is so filled with, I don't know what, irony, lack of wisdom. It's a whole lot of things.